So, welcome to LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I think I've got a good show with an interesting bunch of clips tonight. As always, this is my weekly broadcast of the best clips from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the corporate media here in the United States, along with my commentary between the clips. This week, in addition to the Sunday news shows from the regular Big Five outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, I'll be using some quasi-news clips from some different sources than the usual HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher and Saturday Night Live, because both of them showed reruns this week. So instead, I'm going to show a clip from The Late Show with David Letterman and some clips from this new MSNBC show Up Late with Alec Baldwin. And I'll mostly be covering the main topic of the week, which was the deal that ended the government shutdown and put off the threat of default for a few months. But I also have a few clips about the growing split in the Republican Party and a little bit on immigration reform. But first, I wanted to show a clip of Fox News' Bill O'Reilly promoting his new book, Killing Jesus, on The Late Show with David Letterman, answering a question about a possible conflict between Christianity and Republicanism in this clip.
Now listen, a woman of the faith, she's an ordained minister in a church, said, I have to ask you, to tell you, first of all, that you've made the baby Jesus cry because you are advocating the refusal or the dismissive or the ending of food stamps program. And hungry children are getting hungrier and starving, and this is sinful.
You think he's kidding? He isn't kidding. One of the reviews of Killing Jesus basically didn't like the book because I didn't say that Jesus would have been for Obamacare. Okay, and somehow didn't work that in. So there's a lot of emotion swirling around it, but I'm not against the abolition of food stamps. No.
So the woman from Connecticut is
misinformed?
Misinformed?
Yes.
You're sure you're not making the baby Jesus cry?
I hope not. It's never a good sign.
Now, did you notice that Freudian slip there from Bill O'Reilly where he says he's not against the abolition of food stamps? I think that's the opposite of what he really meant to say, but that may be because Republicans did actually slash food stamps in this last round of bills that they passed before the government shutdown in their farm bill. And over on Fox News Sunday, the panel talked about this, and you can see Fox News' senior political analyst Brit Hume show his disdain for the issue of poor people and food stamps over in this clip.
Passing a budget, immigration reform, farm bill. Those are three specific things that would make a huge difference in our economy right now. And we could get them done by the end of the year.
President Obama laying out a three-point to-do list for Congress now that the government shutdown is over, and we're back now with the panel. White House officials seem to think they're in a win-win situation here, pushing their agenda for the rest of the year. If Republicans are really shaken, then there's a chance maybe they can get some of these big agenda items, especially immigration reform, through. If Republicans resist, again, they can score political points. Brit, is that a smart strategy?
Well, I think it's unrealistic. I don't think that any Republican embarrassment over this shutdown and the drop in the favorability rating of the party is going to necessarily mean they're going to go along with whatever the president wants, sufficient to get a bill on immigration reform, sufficient to get a budget deal, and who knows about the farm bill. I mean, when the president is standing there talking about the farm bill being one of his major elements, that shows you how reduced his agenda is.
Because, of course, that also includes food stamps.
I know it does.
So did you notice there that Brit Hume kind of has a disdain for poor people? And I actually thought that was kind of gross, or at least for the program of food stamps that helps poor people. And also his whole idea that Barack Obama his agenda is getting smaller and smaller. I don't think that is actually necessarily true. And I think you can actually see that there are still people in the Republican Party who think that there could still be this big deal, you know, that was the grand bargain that the Obama administration and the Republicans almost came up with before the election, before Obama was reelected, which would have had some revenue increases and some spending entitlement cuts in the future to sort of get rid of the big $6 trillion worth of debt that has to be cut to take care of, the economic future of the country. But there are still Republicans who think that big deal is possible, and I want to show you one of those. Senator Lindsey Graham was over, I think it was, on Face the Nation on CBS, and he seemed to think that this big deal was still possible, and you can see that in this clip.
People rally around John and learn from this tactical mistake that they made regarding defunding Obamacare. John is ready to do a big deal. They were $150 billion apart, he and President Obama. So as we go back into the budget negotiations, I hope that under Paul Ryan's leadership and with some presidential leadership, we can do what Mark just talked about, an infrastructure bill that would allow us to create jobs, entitlement reform and tax code reform. And John Boehner is a willing participant, so is Mitch McConnell. We've got a unique opportunity here after this debacle called the shutdown to re-energize the Congress and maybe get in better standing. But John Boehner, please follow John.
What about...
So yeah, that was kind of the non-Tea Party wing of the Senate asking House Republicans to follow John Boehner and not follow the Tea Party Republicans, and who were led kind of by Ted Cruz. And I'm going to show several clips of Ted Cruz in a minute, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the size of the deal. That was Lindsey Graham was basically the only person who I saw who seemed to think that there might still be a big deal, a grand bargain type deal. But I did see Democratic Senator John Warner, who Lindsey Graham was referring to there a little earlier on the program. He seemed to think that maybe there could be sort of a medium-sized deal, not the grand bargain, but sort of a medium-sized deal. And I want to show you that clip from Face the Nation here.
The numbers are coming in, $24 billion hit to the economy. We actually increased the deficit. You can't start and stop the largest enterprise in the world, the federal government, without added costs. We've actually built in higher interest rates because anytime we get close to a potential default, we're going to have higher T-bill pricing. That's been built in. That passes through to mortgage costs, car loans, student loans. So what we need to do now is, I'm an advocate of a big deal, but we ought to at least first start and make sure that we actually operate the government for a year going forward with a solid budget and find ways to alleviate some of the damage also being done by sequestration, which is this automatic spending cuts, which Lindsey and I and a whole group of others say was the stupidest way possible to go about cutting government.
So yeah, that is the other issue that keeps coming up, and I'm going to show several clips about sequestration. That was part of the last time there was a deal with it wasn't a government shutdown, but where there was almost a default on the U.S. debt back in 2011. The way that debt default was averted was the Budget Control Act of 2011, where they said that if the super committee of senators and congressmen didn't come up with a grand bargain to deal with all these issues, that there'd be these automatic spending cuts, what's called sequestration, that would be across the board cuts in domestic discretionary spending and defense spending. And there's already been one round of those, and then there's another round coming up in January. And so that was Democratic Senator Mark Warner saying he wants to try to get rid of some of those sequestration cuts. I want to show you this clip of Treasury Secretary Jack Lew talking about both the problems with this deal, but also the problems with the sequestration. Basically, sequestration is hurting the U.S. economy, and sequestration is bad, going along with what Mark Warner said, and he said that Lindsey Graham was also on his side. So here's Jack Lew saying that sequestration is hurting the U.S. economy in this clip.
The fact that we've had this lower spending level?
David, I think there's no question but that the deep spending cuts that are part of sequestration are holding back the economy. There are competing ranges, whether it's 0.5% or more, up to a percentage of GDP. The president's made clear that we think you should replace some of the sequestration cuts with sensible, balanced, entitlement and tax reforms that put us in the right direction for the future.
Who do you blame for the inability to do what you've done in the past?
Obviously, there was a faction, particularly in the House, that took control of some of the direction of this debate. I would just look to what Republican leaders have said themselves about how inadvisable it is and how it can happen again. I think the message that we have to send going forward is that there was a turning point on Wednesday night, and this won't happen again. It can't happen again.
Well, to that point.
So yeah, there's a Jack Lew, Treasury Secretary, saying that he doesn't think that government shutdown or this brinksmanship with the debt ceiling default that can happen again. But he also said that sequestration is hurting the U.S. economy, and there was actually at least one Republican who was against these upcoming sequestration cuts, Senator John McCain, and that's because a huge proportion of the sequestration cuts coming up in January are in defense spending. I think of the $21 billion in cuts, it's like 20 of the $21 billion are coming in defense. I may not have those numbers exactly right, but you can see how they're, at least the hawkish pro-defense Republicans are having problems with that. This is Senator John McCain over on State of the Union, usually with Candy Crowley, but Gloria Borger was filling in this week. And first, you can see John McCain is going to talk about how this deal has hurt or this whole government shutdown has hurt Republicans. And then at the end, he'll say how he's also against some of the sequestration cuts in this clip.
I believe that there's good faith. I think that, Republicans weren't the only ones, Gloria, that suffered in this debacle. The president's numbers went down. Democrat numbers went down. Disapproval rates went up. I use that line a lot. We're down to paid staff and blood relatives. I got a call from my 101-year-old mother. She's angry. So the point is that it's in our interest. It's in our interest to sit down and get some of these issues resolved. Everybody knows that we cannot, this path we're on is unsustainable. So maybe it would be a small bargain. Maybe we can achieve certain things. I'm most worried about sequestration next year and the devastating effect it's having on our military. Okay. I'm telling you, it is having effects that we won't cure for a long time unless we fix that.
And what about?
So yeah, there's Senator John McCain saying maybe there'll be a small deal having to do with sequestration. And he's one of the few Republicans who seems to think that sequestration cuts are bad, although supposedly Lindsey Graham also had that. But, that was the original idea behind sequestration, was that the cuts would be so draconian that no one would ever let them go into effect, and it would force this grand bargain where Democrats would agree to cut entitlements in some way in the future, and Republicans would agree to increase revenues, taxes, which is supposedly for the Democrats, cutting entitlements is, sacred to their party, and raising taxes or not raising taxes supposedly sacred to the Republican Party. So this sequestration was supposed to make both of them cut into their sacred cows, but it didn't work out that way. Instead, you actually now have Republicans who are saying that sequestration is a good thing. And one of those Republicans is the head of the Senate Republicans, Mitch McConnell, or at least by the elected minority leader in the Senate, Mitch McConnell. And you can see in this clip, I'm going to show that first he talks about how he is totally opposed to any revenue increases at all, that he thinks that's that's like asking for ransom. But then he actually says sequestration is a good thing over in this clip.
What I'd like for him is to step up to the plate and do it. Unfortunately, every discussion we've had about this in the past has had what I would call a ransom attached to it, $1 trillion in new tax revenues. Look, we don't have this problem because we tax too little in this country. We have it because we spend too much. We currently have a $17 trillion national debt, and that pales in comparison to what's coming our way if we don't make the eligibility for entitlements fit the demographics of America today and tomorrow. Do I expect this kind of presidential leadership in the near future? Honestly, no. But let me say what I do expect to come out of the next episode that we'll have in January and February. We have, as a result of the Budget Control Act, which was passed in 2011, which the president signed and was supported on a bipartisan basis, actually reduced government spending for 2 years in a row for the first time since right after the Korean War. It is reducing government spending. Our Democratic friends want to bust the caps, in other words, spend more, and they want to raise taxes. For me, the bottom line when we re-engage early next year is I don't want to bust the caps and I don't want to raise spending, because we are, in fact, reducing government spending. Well, not as much as we need to, but it is a success.
So there you can see Republican Senate Leader Mitch McConnell saying that sequestration is actually a success. It's cutting government spending, and that's supposedly a good thing. Although, if you watch my LiberalViewer Sunday clip roundup from last Sunday, you'll see I show this woman from the International Monetary Fund saying that austerity isn't helping. And I actually made a video about that a while back, something like spreadsheet error proves right-wing austerity doesn't work, or something like that. I can't remember the exact title, but Mitch McConnell there is saying that he actually likes sequestration. But the other thing that Mitch McConnell said in that interview on Face the Nation with Bob Schieffer is, I like this. Bob Schieffer started off with this colorful metaphor about how Republicans had shot themselves in the foot, and you can see Mitch McConnell has his own colorful metaphor, and then he pretty much promises that there won't be another government shutdown for all the good that's worth. But anyway, I'll show you that clip right here.
Calling the words of a long ago candidate who lost a Senate race in Texas, who said, "We shot ourselves in the foot and then reloaded." Will you ever let something like this happen again?
You know, one of my favorite old Kentucky sayings is there's no education in the second kick of a mule. The first kick of the mule occurred back in 1995 when the Republican House shut down the government. Look, shutting down the government, in my view, is not conservative policy. I don't think a 2-week paid vacation for federal employees is conservative policy. A number of us were saying back in July that this strategy could not and would not work, and of course it didn't. So there'll not be another government shutdown. You can count on that.
So there's Mitch McConnell saying there's not going to be another government shutdown. You can count on it. But over on This Week with George Stephanopoulos, where Martha Raddatz was filling in, their reporter Jonathon Karl had his interview with Senator Ted Cruz, who started this whole shutdown disaster for the Republican Party, and he wouldn't rule out when the New Deal expires in January doing the whole thing over again. And I'll show you his refusal to rule that out in this clip.
Another deadline. Government funding runs out on January 15th. Will you rule out pushing to the brink of another shutdown by saying you would block funding for the government unless Obamacare is defunded? Will you do that again?
I would do anything, and I will continue to do anything I can to stop the train wreck that is Obamacare. What I intend to do is continue standing with the American people to work to stop Obamacare, because it isn't working, it's costing people's jobs, and it's taking away their health care.
But Cruz continues.
So yeah, there you can see Ted Cruz is not going to rule out doing another one of these government shutdowns in January over Obamacare. So you have like the leaders, like Mitch McConnell, saying there won't be another government shutdown, but exactly how he can stop Ted Cruz from doing that if he wants to do it, I'm not sure how he can promise that. And to make that point, I want to show you Senator John McCain back on State of the Union, CNN State of the Union, being interviewed by Gloria Borger, and she asked, oops, sorry, I'm loading up the next 3 clips here real quick. Gloria Borger asked John McCain, how he could stop Ted Cruz from doing this again, how he could keep this government shutdown from happening again, and his answer didn't seem very convincing, as I will show you in this clip.
Senator Cruz says he's not ruling out a second shutdown. He hasn't ruled it in. He says he's not ruling it out. Can he possibly do that?
I think that he can exercise his rights as a senator, but it will not happen. The American people will not stand for another one of these things. They just won't.
How can you prevent it, though?
Much damage.
How do you prevent that?
I think the American people have spoken and will continue to speak very loudly. Look, we did this back in '95. I've seen this movie before. It was another many years before we tried it again. And I am very confident the American people will not stand for another repetition of this disaster.
So yeah, there you see Senator John McCain saying that this government shutdown won't be repeated because the American people won't let it happen. But you can also see that Senator Ted Cruz was interviewed also on CNN's State of the Union, and he seemed to think that he was the one who was listening to the American people. And I'll show you that clip. This is he was interviewed by Dana Bash over on CNN, and here's that clip.
Come home and you get applause and you get a standing ovation and you get people treating you with such reverence as opposed to the other things that they're saying back in D.C.
Look, I think people are frustrated in Texas and all across the country. People are frustrated that Washington politicians aren't listening to them, and they've been frustrated for a long time. A lot of people are hurting because of Obamacare. A lot of people are hurting because they can't find jobs, and Obamacare is the biggest job killer in this country. A lot of people are hurting because they're losing their insurance, or their insurance premiums are skyrocketing because of Obamacare. And Washington politicians are ignoring them. They're not listening to them. And I think the reason why you see Congress at 5, 10, 15% approval ratings is because DC politicians, career politicians, aren't listening to the people. And what you just saw there is people just expressing relief that somebody is actually listening to the people and trying to help give them a voice in Washington.
So yeah, there's Ted Cruz saying that he's the one listening to the American people, and as far as having learned a lesson from this whole episode, I'll show you a clip also from that same interview. Here's Senator Ted Cruz explaining what lesson he's learned from the government shutdown and the whole almost destruction of the Republican Party, in my opinion, over in this clip.
It's not like you've learned a lesson, Senator.
Well, I'll tell you, the lesson I've learned is that what we've seen the last couple of months has been extraordinary. We have seen millions of Americans rise up. Over 2 million Americans signed a national petition at don'tfundit.com and melted the phone lines down at Capitol Hill. Just a couple of months ago, official Washington scoffed that might happen. We also saw the House of Representatives stand up, exercise a profile of courage, listening to the people and saying, we've got to provide real relief from Obamacare for the people who are being hurt from Obamacare. That, again, a couple of months ago, all of official Washington said would never happen. Now, the reason this failed was simple. Senate Republicans didn't unite. You mentioned that you don't think this could ever succeed. Let me ask you a hypothetical. Imagine this same battle played out with one thing different. Imagine if after the House had passed a bill funding all of the federal government, but defunding Obamacare, imagine if Senate Republicans had come together, had united and had stood side by side with House Republicans and had said, we're with the American people. We want to fund our government. We want to fund every aspect of our government, but we want to answer the American people who are being hurt because of Obamacare. We would have ended up with a very different result. The deal this week was a lousy deal for the American people.
So yeah, there's Ted Cruz. The lesson he learned was that it wasn't his fault. It was the fault of the Senate Republicans who didn't stick with him. And let me just load up the next few clips here. He basically made the same point over on this week with George Stephanopoulos in that interview with Jonathon Karl. Let me just add in the next 3 clips here real quick. And you can see Ted Cruz blaming other Senate Republicans for the loss of this whole strategy over in this clip.
You did a radio interview where you compared Senate Republicans to an Air Force going over and bombing their own troops, bombing conservatives, bombing House conservatives.
And when you've got half the Senate Republican caucus firing their cannons at the House Republicans, it sabotages the effort. The reason this deal, the lousy deal, was reached is because, unfortunately, Senate Republicans made the choice not to support House Republicans.
But you're saying more than that, though. You're saying that not only did they not support House conservatives, that they attacked House conservatives, House Republicans.
Well, and I think that was unfortunate. I think it was unfortunate that you saw multiple members of the Senate Republicans going on television, attacking House conservatives, attacking the efforts to defund Obamacare, saying it cannot win, it's a fool's errand, we will lose, this must fail. That is a recipe for losing the fight. And it's a shame.
So one thing I thought was interesting about the beginning of that clip there was that Jonathon Karl of ABC confronted Ted Cruz with this supposed quote about Republicans dive bombing their own troops, but then the clip he played actually had him just talking about shooting cannons at the troops. So he didn't have his clips right, even though it was basically the same idea. But if you want to hear Ted Cruz actually say that the Senate Republicans were dive bombing the House Republicans, that actually came up explicitly over in Dana Bash's interview of Ted Cruz, saying kind of the same sentiment. And I'll show you that in this clip.
Well, look, I respect and admire John McCain. He is a war hero. He is a man of incredible personal courage. I will say this. When you've got Senate Republicans saying, we cannot win, we will surrender, this is a fool's errand, it sabotages the effort. In my view, I think the House Republicans marched out on principle to say, we're listening to the people who are hurting because of Obamacare, and I wish that Senate Republicans had come in like the cavalry to support them. Instead, they made a different decision. They made a decision not just not to support the House Republicans, but to come in like an Air Force and dive bomb them. You know what I think has hurt Republicans is all of the Senate Republicans who have attacked House Republicans, who have gone on television.
I think he's talking
and
about
led
you,
the
sir,
attacks.
not House Republicans.
Well, but look, he's talking about everyone who is engaged in this fight.
Yeah, and so there you can hear the actual dive bombing quote, and again, Ted Cruz blaming the other Republicans in the Senate. But actually, one of the most interesting parts of that Dana Bash interview with Ted Cruz was where she revealed what she'd been hearing from other Senate Republicans about Ted Cruz and about some of the meetings that went on behind closed doors. That basically she was saying that other senators were red-faced, yelling at him, trying to get him in line, and she even called it something like an intervention. And I thought it was interesting seeing how Ted Cruz reacted to what Dana Bash's sources were saying about what was going on behind closed doors in the Senate. And you can see that in this clip.
Let me just ask you about this, because one of your colleagues told me it was like an intervention, that there were so many of your colleagues saying, why are you doing this? And really angry at you. And I'm just wondering, even on a human level, they told me that you really didn't flinch. On a human level, that's gotta bother you, to be sitting in an institution like the Senate and having your, not Democrats, fellow Republicans so angry at you?
Dana, not remotely. Because
Why?
the people I work for are the women and men you just saw. I work for 26 million Texans. That's my job, to fight for them. I don't work for the party bosses in Washington. I work for the people of Texas, and I fight for them. And the reason people are frustrated all over the country is that far too many people get elected and they think they're there to be part of the club. You know what was very interesting about some of those closed-door discussions? What I said in those closed-door discussions, I would have said the exact same thing if CNN's camera was sitting in the room. What I say privately to my colleagues is the same thing I say publicly. And you know what's interesting? Virtually every person in that room that was criticizing what Mike Lee and I were doing would have said very different things if a camera was in this room, because what they're telling their constituents is very different from what they're saying behind closed doors.
Do you?
So yeah, there's Ted Cruz saying that he is, the voice of principle in the Republican Party, and that the people who are opposing him in the Senate are like double dealers who aren't saying the same things behind closed doors that they're saying to their constituents. But that's, one side of the Republican Party, and I'm going to actually get a little more into the split in the Republican Party in a few clips later. But I want to show, before I get to that more completely, I also want to show a couple clips of what is kind of the other side, the more moderate side of the Republican Party. Let me just load up the next 3 clips here real quick. I got a couple clips representing that side of the Republican Party. First, former Florida Governor Jeb Bush, who may be the next Bush to run for president. He didn't deny the possibility that he would be running for president in 2016. He was asked also over on This Week with George Stephanopoulos, ABC. He was interviewed by ABC's Jonathon Karl, and Jonathon Karl asked him what would be his message to Senator Ted Cruz, and you can see how he represents sort of the more moderate side of the Republican Party over in this clip.
Rule out pushing to the brink once again. What would your message be to Ted Cruz?
Well, frankly, I think the best way to repeal Obamacare is to have an alternative. We never hear the alternative. We could do this in a much lower cost with improved quality based on our principles, free market principles. And 2, show how Obamacare, flawed to its core, doesn't work. So have a little bit of self-restraint. It might actually be a politically a better approach to see the massive dysfunction. But we don't even hear about that because we've stepped on that message. And I think Republicans need to just take a step back and show a little self-restraint and let this happen a little more organically.
So yeah, there's a former Florida Governor Jeb Bush and brother of George W. Bush and son of George H.W. Bush saying that Senator Ted Cruz needs to relax a little and be a little more moderate, be a little more patient. And I thought that was kind of interesting. And speaking of the whole Bush dynasty, over on Fareed Zakaria's GPS on CNN, they also had former Bush advisor Jim Baker, who is from Texas and is like a political Svengali, and he was asked about Ted Cruz, and I want to show that clip. And especially I thought there was this interesting part at the beginning where he reminded everyone that Ted Cruz was one of the lawyers who helped him work on the Florida recount in the Bush v. Gore almost, or what a lot of Democrats see as a theft of that election after the basically the tie in Florida and after the 2000 election. But anyway, here's the Bush family advisor and the person who basically stole the election for the Bushes in 2000. Here's what he had to say about Ted Cruz over on CNN's Fareed Zakaria's GPS in this clip.
I'm sure that he represents my views in the Republican Party, but I'm not going to sit here and dump all over my junior senator, particularly given the fact that he worked for me in 2000. He was a very fine lawyer in that recount battle we had in Florida, and he was a good Solicitor General for the state of Texas. Was he wrong on this most recent episode? In my view, yes. It hurt us. It didn't gain us anything. We kicked the can just 3 months down the road. We didn't accomplish anything. It didn't take a rocket scientist, in my view, to figure out that if you don't have the Senate and you don't have the White House, you're not going to be able to defund Obamacare. It was a maximalist position, had no chance of being accomplished, and therefore I think it was a mistake. And I think it was Senator John McCain, if I'm not mistaken, who said it was a fool's errand, and I'm not disinclined to disagree with that.
That's sort of another person saying the opposite of what they mean. I'm not disinclined to disagree with that. I think he mean he's not inclined to disagree with that, but whatever, that's just a minor mistake. But I thought that was an interesting analysis of Ted Cruz from one of the more moderate elders of the party, kind of like the same with Jeb Bush. But there are definitely members of the Republican Party, leaders of the Republican Party who don't want to cross Ted Cruz and his the whole like disaster of shutting down the government. And one of those was, I noticed, was Senator Marco Rubio, who is another possible presidential candidate in 2016. And he definitely is trying to avoid crossing the Tea Party or Ted Cruz. He didn't vote for the eventual deal that opened up the government and avoided a debt ceiling default. But when Chris Wallace asked him about that over on Fox News Sunday, he wouldn't even be accountable for not voting to open up the government or to avoid the debt ceiling default. And I'll show you that clip here.
Having me back. You're one of the 18 Republican senators who voted against the final deal to reopen the government. Was that, in effect, a political gesture because you knew it was going to pass anyway, or were you really prepared to keep the government shut down and to bump up to pass the deadline for raising the debt limit?
Well, let me be clear. I never was in favor of shutting down the government. I was never in favor of defunding the government. I was in favor of funding the government fully, voted to fund the government fully, made efforts to fund the government fully. The only thing I didn't want to see us waste any more money on is Obamacare, which has proven to be a disaster.
So yeah, there's Marco Rubio saying that he's not accountable for not voting to open the government. He's not accountable for not voting to raise the debt ceiling because that wasn't, really his fault. And let me just load up the next 3 clips here real quick, and I will show you he more explicitly didn't even take responsibility for shutting down the government at all. A little, basically in his next answer, or immediately after that, you can see Senator Marco Rubio still saying that the shutdown was the fault of the Democrats in the Senate and President Barack Obama over in this clip.
Well, I've never wanted there to be a government shutdown. The people who shut down the government, but Chris, the people who shut down the government were the president and the Democrats in the Senate, who basically said that unless you fund the entire government, unless you fund Obamacare, we are unwilling to fund the entire government. They took that position and they forced this this situation that we've just gone through.
So yeah, that's Marco Rubio still blaming the Democrats and the president for the shutdown. One other thing I wanted to play, or one other clip I wanted to play, was from on this whole shutdown and the default is sort of an antidote to some of the arguments I heard from Republicans over the last couple weeks. There's this clip I want to play from Mark Zandi from Moody's, who's one of the rating agencies. The last time there was, we came close to default in 2011 before the Budget Control Act and the last big deal. The U.S. got downgraded. I think it was S&P actually downgraded the United States credit rating. And I've heard a lot of Republicans say that the reason that our credit rating was downgraded was because of our big debt, not because of the government shutdown or the inability to deal with the possibility of a default, raising the debt ceiling and that whole brinksmanship that came very close to the United States going into default. Well, Mark Zandi, who is one of the people over at Moody's who does these credit ratings, he said it had nothing, we didn't need a big debt deal to avoid a downgrade in the United States credit rating. Just stop doing this whole brinksmanship with default. And I want to show that clip here.
Coming to even a reasonable, in my view, grand bargain would be great. It'd be nice if we got that, but it's not necessary. All that's necessary is we have to decide that we're not going to shut the government down and we're not going to default on our obligations. And if we do that, the underlying economy is in pretty good shape, and that will shine through, and we will be in a pretty good place.
So yeah, that's sort of the independent analyst to the extent that any of those people are really independent, saying that we don't need a big debt deal to avoid a downgrade or even to avoid to stop economic growth. All we really need to do is to stop this, government by crisis. And there was actually a good suggestion from Senator Chuck Schumer over on Meet the Press as to how we could avoid these debt ceiling default crises coming up over and over again. And I thought it was kind of interesting because it was actually the McConnell rule that he brought up. And I'll play that clip over here.
The Republican parties in the House and Senate are not a majority Tea Party. They are mainstream conservatives, very conservative, but mainstream. They've seen their numbers drop dramatically because they followed the Tea Party, and they, I think, may decide not to go forward in this direction. And so I think that we'll see a new type of negotiation where we come together. Now, one way, David, to avoid this from happening again is for us to implement the McConnell rule, which says that Congress must disapprove rather than approve increases in the debt ceiling. If we were to do that, the chances of going up to the brink again, the chances of this kind of debacle would decrease. I'm going to introduce legislation to do just Senator, that, and it would really help.
On that.
So yeah, there's Senator Chuck Schumer from New York saying that there's the possibility that they'll change the way they deal with the debt ceiling. And I mean, that would make sense, where instead of the Congress having to raise the debt ceiling, it would have to be the Congress would have to vote against raising the debt ceiling, because for those who don't know, the debt ceiling by raising the debt ceiling doesn't really authorize any new spending. It only authorizes borrowing to cover spending that's already been authorized by previous legislation. So the whole thing's kind of silly that there's not an authorization to borrow after the authorization to spend. But anyway, that's the way the system is set up. So anyway, those are like I guess it was about 20 clips there on the big budget deal. And I want to play a few other clips, before I leave all the clips of the Ted Cruz interview with Dana Bash. There was one thing I saw over on that Dana Bash interview on CNN that if I'd seen it on Fox News, I would have classified it as like a Fox News bias clip. I want to show you this clip where this isn't really about the deal. This is about the problems with the rollout of Obamacare. And you can see Dana Bash is asking Ted Cruz if the Secretary of Health and Human Services in the Obama administration, Kathleen Sebelius, should resign over the problems with Obamacare. But keep your eye on the title, what they call the chyron, the lower third title that comes up while Dana Bash is asking the question about whether Secretary Kathleen Sebelius should be forced to resign because of the problems with Obamacare over in this clip.
One newsy question before I let you go. Kathleen Sebelius, some of your colleagues are saying she should resign. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely, she should resign. Why? Because the program she has implemented, Obamacare, is a disaster. It's not working. It's hurting people all across this country.
So scapegoat Sebelius? I don't know. That doesn't seem like that's an unbiased title or summary of the issue there. I mean, I think that kind of is a tendentious chyron. So I thought I would point that out just to be... I noticed it when I was watching the Sunday shows. It seemed kind of biased in favor of Sebelius there, that if she were the one who had to take a fall for the failures in Obamacare, it would be scapegoating, which is, of course, a word that would mean that she was unfairly taking blame, so that is definitely a judgment call. I'm going to show you a few clips more about the growing split in the Republican Party, but first I want to show a couple clips that kind of lead into that, where Marco Rubio is talking about the problems with comprehensive immigration reform, and you can see him kind of moving away from his own bill. For those who remember, several weeks back or a couple months back in my LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundups, I did a lot of coverage of the comprehensive immigration reform bill that passed the U.S. Senate, and it had, all this like billions and billions of additional dollars for added border security, but it also had this path to citizenship. It took like 13 years, and there are all these hurdles, but there is a path to citizenship in the bill. And Marco Rubio, now that he's thinking of running for president, is kind of moving away from his own bill, and you can see that, and I showed clips of that, months ago, before, around the time it was passed, he was already moving away from his bill, but you can see that even more clearly over in his interview on Fox News Sunday with Chris Wallace, first starting with this clip.
Let me ask you about the Senate plan. You were one of the architects of the plan that passed the Senate, but there's been some speculation that because of political backlash against the plan that perhaps you have backed away from it. So let me ask you directly, as part of a comprehensive plan that does include tougher enforcement measures, do you still support an earned path to citizenship?
Well, again, number one, the answer is yes, depending on the way that it's outlined in a comprehensive package. I still continue to believe, as I always have, that the best way to address immigration reform is in individual bills that build on each other sequentially. I've always believed that. Now, the Senate went a different direction. I wanted to influence what the Senate came up with. I felt it was important for the Senate to take the first step in this debate. We have House colleagues. They have their own ideas about how to pursue this. And ultimately, Chris, we've been lectured now for the last 3 weeks about being realistic. We've been told that you're not going to get rid of Obamacare, you're not going to repeal it, you're not going to defund it because Barack Obama's in the White House. You have to be realistic. We've been lectured about that. Well, I think they need to be realistic about immigration reform. The fact of the matter is the House and many of its members have very strong opinions on what a reform effort should look like, and without them on board, there won't be reform. So I think many Democrats are going to have to make the decision about immigration. Do they want this as a political talking point, or are they looking for a result? And if they're looking for a result, they're going to have to show a little bit more flexibility on some of the key points like the one you've outlined.
So yeah, and the flexibility that Democrats are going to have to show is on the path to citizenship, that some conservatives, even though it's taking forever to get that citizenship, are still calling amnesty. And if you want to see why it is that Marco Rubio is backing away from the legislation that he helped create, I'll show you the next clip where Chris Wallace brought that up right here.
Conservatives, as you well know, call your plan, even though it takes 13 years to become a citizen and you have to go through a lot of steps to do so, still call your plan amnesty. And the fact is, in these early presidential horse race polls, you have taken a hit. I want to put up one of them. In April, you led the Quinnipiac poll with 19%, followed by Ryan, Rand Paul, and Christie. But this month, Paul leads, followed by Christie, and you're back in third place. Has your support for comprehensive immigration reform hurt you with conservatives?
Again, obviously you're citing a poll that shows that might be the case, but that's not why I did it. So clearly, if someone was only looking at everything through the lens of what the future could hold politically, they probably would never have undertaken this issue. I knew that going in. I remain convinced this is an important issue for our country to confront and to solve. I felt like I was in a position to try to make a positive difference. Anytime you pass any law or any bill, it's not going to be perfect. It's going to have parts of it you agree with strongly. It's going to have parts of it you perhaps wish were different, as is the case with this bill. But ultimately, I continue to believe it's an important issue for our nation to confront, because the alternative is to leave things the way they are right now. And I would continue to argue that the way things are right now is a de facto amnesty. Now, is there a way to improve upon what the Senate did? Probably. I'm sure there is. And that's what I hope the House will work on here, and they deserve the time and space to be able to do that.
So yeah, what I really liked about those two answers from Marco Rubio is I think it shows how, when he's running for president in 2016, how he's going to try to explain his support for comprehensive immigration reform in the Senate. He's going to say that he wanted to have influence on what the Senate was doing. It wasn't really his plan, and he thought it was a good first step, but he was hoping the House would improve it, and that seems less and less likely now. But basically, I think you're hearing what he's going to be saying in the debates, in the Republican debates leading up to 2016, trying to justify to the anti-immigrant wing of his party how he could have helped be an architect of comprehensive immigration reform. After those couple clips on immigration, I also want to show you a few more clips on the growing split in the Republican Party. And hold on real quick while I add in these next three clips. First, there's the question as to whether the big disaster over the government shutdown and the coming close to going into default over the debt ceiling, whether that has increased the chances of the Republicans losing the House of Representatives in 2014. And, I've been talking about that for the last couple of weeks on the LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup, and basically my position has been that while it was basically impossible before this happened, now it's becoming possible, not necessarily likely. And while I usually try to keep my clips on this show to newsmakers and not commentators, I did want to show a couple professional political analysts talking about the possibility of the Republicans losing the House. First is Stuart Rothenberg, who does this whole political analysis report. I think it's called the Rothenberger Report. And then he's followed up by Michael Gerson, who used to be an advisor to the George W. Bush administration. Anyway, I'll show you that clip right here.
That the Republicans might lose the House next time? Could they? Or
let's do numbers again. We have 24 Republican districts at significant risk, 24 districts at risk, 12 significant, 12 marginal. Some of those marginal races could move into real risk, and some races that are off the board could move. What I've said is 6 months ago it was not plausible to say the House is at risk. Now it might be. Give me 2 or 3 months and I'll tell you whether I think it is at risk.
Yeah, I think getting 17 seats is an uphill battle for Democrats in the way our districts are gerrymandered and our current system. I don't see the signs right now of a wave election. What you might see, but it's early. We'll see how this works out, and of course it'll unfold early next year again. If Republicans repeat, silly tactics like this, they're on a downward path. If they take a different path, I think you'll have a different outcome.
Yeah. So there's Michael Gerson saying that he doesn't see the wave election, but I think those numbers are interesting to consider. I guess Michael Gerson is saying the number that the Democrats need is 17. I think that's the right number. The Democrats need to pick up 17 seats to have control of the House of Representatives. And Stuart Rothenberger was saying that there are basically 12 races where they're competitive, and maybe another 12 that are close to competitive. But he hasn't really done the polling to see how this whole latest shutdown and debt ceiling fight have affected that, and maybe in a couple months it'll look like there's been enough effect that there'll be more seats in play. And I mean, it's difficult because of all the gerrymandering, and the place it may really be hurting the Republicans is in the Senate, where the Democrats are defending a lot more seats than the Republicans in the Senate in 2014, so the Republicans actually had a chance to maybe even take the Senate. Now it looks like Mitch McConnell, the minority leader in the Senate, the head Republican in the Senate, he's actually facing challenges both from the Tea Party on his right and then from a Democratic challenger. So he may actually lose his seat, never mind becoming majority leader. But on the challenge to Mitch McConnell in Kentucky, from the Tea Party, Bob Schieffer asked him about that, and I thought that was an interesting look at some of the split in the Republican Party, looking at how Mitch McConnell's being challenged from the right, and I've never really seen Mitch McConnell as not being a right-winger, and Mitch McConnell makes that point himself over in this clip.
Kentucky. Are we seeing a war now for the soul of the Republican Party?
Well, let me say this about the primary in Kentucky. I've endured millions of dollars of attack ads that have been calling me a right-wing fanatic over the years. I think that my opponents in the primary are going to have a hard time convincing Kentucky primary voters that I'm some kind of liberal. I enjoy the support of the most famous Tea Party senator in America, Rand Paul. I'm supported by Marco Rubio, Pat Toomey, 2 other Tea Party favorites who were elected in 2010. I have the support of Mike Huckabee and Bill Bennett. I think they're going to have a hard time convincing Kentucky primary voters that Mitch McConnell is some kind of liberal. In fact, we took a poll last month to check that out, and only 2% of Kentuckians thought I was a liberal. So I think that's a pretty hard sell, and it's almost certainly going to fail.
Yeah, so there's Mitch McConnell saying that he doesn't think that this Tea Party insurgency in Kentucky is going to be able to convince the voters in Kentucky that he's some kind of liberal after being definitely on the right wing for many, many years. And I don't agree with Mitch McConnell on a lot of things, but I think it will be difficult to paint him as a liberal. On the other hand, there are these new power centers that are really, in a way, redefining what conservatism is in the Republican Party, and they have a lot of money and sort of like political action groups that do grassroots lobbying. And I noticed over on This Week with George Stephanopoulos, one of the Republican members of the House of Representatives, he made a couple comments about this, talking about Freedom Works and Heritage Action, and how the Republican Party was being run by these 30-year-old staffers. And I have a follow-up clip on that. But first, here he is, Adam. I think his name is Adam Kinzinger, who's talking about these outside groups who are having undue influence on the Republican Party from the right in this clip.
Moment, because you see, I'll call it the kind of the Ron Paul, movement, which all belong to the Republican Party. Whether you support Ron Paul, whether you support Ted Cruz, or whether you support Chris Christie, we're a big tent Republican Party. But I think as a party, we've got to have a real conversation about the fact that you can have different views. You can vote with the Tea Party 8 out of 10 times and still be a conservative. The conservative movement has slowly been redefined to what Freedom Works and Club for Growth wanted to look like, which are outside unelected groups run by a couple of 30-year-old staffers. And that's what my concern is.
Yeah, so there's that talking point, and I've heard it from other people, not just that Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger talking about these outside groups, the Heritage Action, or he talked about Heritage Action in an earlier clip, and here he was talking about Freedom Works there and the 30-year-old staffer. Well, one of the most interesting clips on all the shows was actually on Fox News Sunday, where for their Power Player of the Week, they had this 30-year-old staffer who runs Heritage Action on, talking about the way that he is enforcing this conservative orthodoxy, and it's what that Republican congressman was talking about in terms of redefining conservatism in the Republican Party. And so anyway, I want to show you, this is Michael Needham, who is the CEO, I think, of the Heritage Action Group, and you can see the whole process explained on Fox News Sunday in this clip.
To Tuesday, House Speaker Boehner pushed a bill that would show that the GOP was united, that would get a minor concession on Obamacare, and you and Heritage Action came out and urged members to vote no and said, we are going to make this a key vote on our legislative scorecard. And I have to say, it looked like Michael Needham had more clout than the Speaker, because suddenly he didn't have the votes and he had to pull his own bill.
Well, I think that's ridiculous. The House of Representatives deserves a lot of credit for having listened and fought on Obamacare, and that's something that's admirable, listening to the American people.
But I guess my question is, why is it that in the end the House members sided with Michael Needham and not John Boehner?
They didn't. They sided with the American people. What we put out is
they sided with your view of what the American people wanted rather than John Boehner's view.
Well, they sided with millions of constituents. Our scorecard is the most transparent scorecard out there. People can go to heritageaction.com, and we say, here are the votes that we think are important, here's why we think they're important, and here's how your member of Congress voted.
But you do more than just put out a website. In fact, you'll go door to door during a primary campaign and push your scorecard, correct?
We're going door to door every single day of the year and make sure that people know about the information that's out there, so that they are
and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but what the point is that if somebody had voted for the Boehner bill over your objections and you had said it was a no, you're going to go door to door in his district and say, hey, Congressman so-and-so voted.
We're going to go door to door and explain people's voting record and explain tough questions.
A lot of you.
So yeah, if you want to know why it is that the House of Representatives couldn't get their act together, why it is that 144 House Republicans voted against the deal that ended the government shutdown and put off the debt ceiling default, that guy, Michael Needham, and his operation to enforce this conservative orthodoxy, that is the reason why the Republican Party has become so dysfunctional that they can't make deals and follow their leaders, and they stick on these maximalist principles. That clip, I think, is one of the most informative clips of all the clips I played today. So you can go back and look at that again if you want. But that is sort of what I wanted to show about the growing split in the Republican Party, and the Heritage Action and Freedom Works pressure that's causing that, and Ted Cruz and the Tea Party, that they're on one side, and then you've got Jeb Bush and Lindsey Graham and John McCain and and Mitch McConnell apparently on the other side, and how that's going to play out, that is going to be one of the most interesting political battles of the next couple years, and it's going to determine whether, you know, who holds the House of Representatives in 2014, and whether there's going to be another Democrat in the White House in 2016. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed all those clips. I wanted to also, before I finish up here and start looking in the discussion section for the on-topic comments, I want to show a couple clips from this new MSNBC show, Up Late with Alec Baldwin. It's another one of my quasi-news clips. And actually, I've watched most of the first couple episodes, and it almost makes me think that Alec Baldwin may be running for some political office. It almost looks like he's this is some kind of springboard for him, and I'm not sure exactly how entertaining or informative it is to watch as a whole, but I thought there were a couple comments from this week's episode from Friday night. He interviewed Debra Winger, so it was a very Hollywood-centric and media-centric conversation. And the first little clip I want to show is when they were talking about how wars were covered in the past compared to like our more recent wars, like the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War. Debra Winger talked about growing up in the 60s with the Vietnam War, and anyway, this is what it is that has made us more cynical and how it relates to the new media. And anyway, I'll play the whole thing in this clip.
I always quote this example that Robert Sam Anson was a writer who he wrote a book about JFK's assassination. And oddly enough, this year is the 50th anniversary of his assassination. And Anson wrote this book in which he said, let's view everything through the same filter, which is pre-Watergate and post-Watergate. That it was Watergate, Ellsberg, all that really taught us what was going on, what the country was really doing.
Well, that isn't.
It was going on before that, but we weren't as aware of it. We didn't really see it as much. Now
I think the war, you know, for me, watching as a young girl, when we used to be able to see it on TV, remember when they used to show us the bodies instead of make us imagine them? That had a profound effect on me, that that things were wrong. So I knew in my gut. The
military did their best to make sure that didn't happen again.
Right. Yeah. Which is, you know, a shocking thing if you think about it, that we accepted somehow.
Sure.
So yeah, I wanted to play that clip because I think that's really true. The different way the media covers war, and also that I guess that was I kind of related to that because I think I'm maybe a little younger than Debra Winger, but I remember the Vietnam War, and I was a fairly young child, but my father was in the Army. He was a doctor in the Army, we lived on an Army base from like 1968 to 1971, and so I definitely had a lot of sensitivity to Vietnam War coverage and the plight of the soldiers there, and there was a lot more graphic coverage. You could see a lot more graphic coverage of the carnage of Vietnam, I think, than we saw in the Iraq War and Afghanistan. And I think the military and the media have worked together in some ways to not show the horrors of war the way that I remember seeing them when I was a kid. So I want to show that clip, and then I want to show one last clip about sort of the new media. You can see Debra Winger and Alec Baldwin are older than me, are not very adept with the internet, but you can see them talking about whether the internet and the way that information is now online, whether that causes a longer memory or less of a memory. I thought that, anyway, this is the final clip I want to show you tonight, I thought was kind of interesting here.
As one famous actor who I really admire, I don't want to name his name, but he had like this really interesting reversal
If I
in his
guess
life.
it, will you tell me if
Off camera, well, yeah, and you can even write it down on a piece of paper if you care. That's why that's sometimes why we have the paper here, so we'll get a pen so you can write me notes. But this very famous man who was going through some reversal in his private life, he said that the internet, it represents the death of forgetting. Because there are some things that need to be forgotten. We can't move on. And he said, we can't reinvent ourselves.
I don't think it's the death of forgetting. I think it's the birth of forgetting, because we don't have to remember anything.
Yeah, I kind of like that. Because I think the internet is actually both. It is both the death of forgetting and the birth of forgetting, because I know I don't have to remember a lot of things I used to have to remember, because I can always Google them on my phone. And anyway, I guess that kind of comes far afield from the other clips I was showing, but I have about 5 minutes or so to go through the comments here and try to get a little live discussion going on the clips I showed. Let me go back down to the bottom here. Let me see, I got... okay, I started here. Let's see if I can find any good on-topic questions. Michael Derby says, they seem to have a problem with food stamps, but nothing wrong with corporate welfare. It's almost comical what these people say and sad at the same time. And that's true. I didn't really go into the whole farm bill, but what happened with the farm bill is traditionally food stamps have been part of the farm bill because it was originally because the agricultural surpluses were used to go into the food stamp program, but now it's just sort of a marriage of convenience where the farmers get all this corporate welfare, and then there's actual welfare for hungry people who need food stamps, and those were put together into the farm bill. And then this year Republicans decided they were going to increase the corporate welfare to these big corporate farmers, but strip out the food stamps and slash the benefits to the people on food stamps, and it was really awful. So, I mean, I think it was good that President Obama brought up that issue as one of his 3 important issues in that news conference that Fox News was criticizing, or Brit Hume from Fox News was criticizing him for. And I thought it was kind of gross the way that Brit Hume just dismissed the whole food stamps issue as like some small, unimportant issue. You know, I think if he didn't have any food to eat, the food stamps might be a little more important to Brit Hume. But anyway, so thanks for that there. Let me sort of scroll up here, see if I can find another couple questions to answer before I run out of time. Let me see. Michael Aronson says, I giggle when he says bust the caps. Yeah, I guess that's kind of a that is a term they've been using for getting rid of the sequesters. They bust the caps, but they never say bust a cap in the deficit's ass or anything. So yeah, I think the bust the caps, I've noticed that myself, so I like that. Let me see. There seems to be a lot of people who don't like Mitch McConnell and Ted Cruz here. But I'm going to avoid reading all the profanity directed at them in the comment section. Let me see if I can find 1 or 2 more on-topic questions or comments to answer here. Let me see. There's a lot of you seem to be discussing with each other. NO8549 asks, how can the Affordable Care Act? How can they say the Affordable Care Act is a disaster when it has barely started? Yeah, I mean, I noticed that, and one of the things that came up that I didn't show in the clips that the Health and Human Services Department actually put out numbers of the number of people who have applied through the federal Obamacare website, who have applied to enroll, and it's something like 500,000 people, and they were like totally putting down that number. The Republicans, especially on Fox News, saying, well, the number of people who have applied isn't the number of people who have enrolled, and maybe some of those people won't enroll. But I mean, it's like 2 weeks in, and they have like several months to eventually enroll. I don't know why people are like saying that Obamacare has failed when they are just trying it. So yes, NO8549, I definitely agree with that point there. So let me see if I can find one more. I'm almost let's see, can't comment no more. Bedoy34 says, why don't they call the Tea Party what it is? Reactionary, not conservative, but reactionary. Well, I mean, I think that is definitely true. I mean, I think what was it? I showed one clip there with a Republican saying that a government shutdown is not conservative. I mean, a government shutdown is a waste of money. What was it, Mitch McConnell, I think, who said that, you know, paying all these government workers to stay home and not work, that's not conservative. I mean, this is not a conservative way. It's not a rational way to govern, and yeah, I definitely agree with that. Anyway, I'm glad to see that I had like 125, 130 people watching the Liberal Viewer Sunday Live clip roundup tonight. I hope you enjoyed the clips I picked out. I spent the day watching all those shows for you and picking out what I thought were the best clips, and it looked like there were some good comments. So thank you all for joining me. If anyone would like, I know I get a lot of requests for a little picture of Sandy here. Sandy, you want to show? Come here, Sandy. Show people your... It's a cute puppy. So that's how we'll end the show, and thank you for joining me. This is 6:30 p.m. Pacific every Sunday evening. Have a good rest of your weekend. For those of you who are joining me in the United States, have a good beginning of your week. For my European viewers, and join me next week every Sunday, 6:30 p.m. Pacific, for Liberal Viewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks again for joining me.